Hello and welcome everyone. This is our conversation with one of the Agile Academy Ambassadors, Klaus Bucka-Lassen, based out of Zurich in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken, Klaus. The intention of this conversation is to share your story and your expertise with some of the people out there that are interested in learning more about what you do and how you do your work. So all of our focus will be today on learning more about you, Klaus. So welcome to this conversation.
Thank you, Sohrab. Let me just turn off my mobile phone here.
Yeah. maybe not the worst idea. Yeah.
That's
Well,
a good start.
yeah, that's a good start. I mean, it's always good to have a bit of fun at the start.
Yes. Okay.
So, Klaus, you and I met probably 10 years ago. And
Exactly what event it was.
yeah,
Yeah, in Prague at the Scrum gathering in the global Scrum gathering in Prague.
yeah, so that is 10 years ago because that was 2015.
Oh, there you go. So I didn't remember the year. I remember the event. You remember
You remember the event. And I don't know whether it was before that or after that my father attended a Scrum training with Jeff, and I think you were the co-trainer of that training in Zurich.
That's right. Yes, exactly. So that was probably before that.
Yeah, that was probably before that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I've been co-training with Jeff since 2010.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I had found that training for my dad and one of our colleagues, Michael, back then. I couldn't make that date, so I then joined a training with Jeff Sutherland in Amsterdam with another one of his partners, Xebia. But yeah, so you and I met then in Prague in 2015. So exactly to the year, 10 years ago. Klaus, my intention today is to learn more about how basically your own Agile journey started, in what kind of initiatives you have worked, where have you applied these principles, what kind of learnings you've had as part of your journey, and ultimately how you work with customers today. Where is your focus? Not only geographically, more interestingly for me is like topic wise, what is it that you believe you can do exceptionally well? And where is it, for example, that potential clients should reach out to you so that you can be the person that helps them, that guides them through this, I believe, very difficult journey, transforming or changing how they do their work, ultimately changing their organization. So let's start at the very beginning. What is your background and when did this whole agile/Scrum thing start for you?
When we met recently in Bern, I think you were a bit surprised when I said, like, I usually claim that my agile career has started in 1992, or was it even 91? That was I was studying computer science in Aarhus in Denmark, where I was born and raised, and we had this course about rapid prototyping. Or it was like system engineering and system design. They made this, they called it back then, they called it like the Jackson model, what we today would call the waterfall model, like where you plan everything up front, kind of like you build a bridge, like you get all the requirements, you plan everything up front, and then you implement it, like, and they presented it as a theoretical, ridiculous way of building software. And the alternative was rapid prototyping, yeah, incrementally building things or building software. And yeah, that's kind of when my agile career started, I would say. And when I left university in '96 and moved to Switzerland to work for a bank here, a bank that doesn't exist anymore, by the way. Um, but it took me, when you have a mental model of something and you get contradicting information, like in the beginning, it doesn't fit. It's not like you change your mental model immediately. It's like you try and you want to make that fit your mental model. And it took me 2 years to realize that these guys are actually doing waterfall, like it was described to us as a useless model in university. And yeah, then I was in limbo for a while. I thought, like, hey, we should be doing incremental software development, like delivering often, instead of like these big 1 year releases or even worse. And then in 2001, I discovered the Agile Manifesto. I can't remember who pointed me towards that. A little bit later, then I discovered Scrum. So actually, that was later, after 2001, and I think that was my brother who pointed me towards Scrum and said, like, check this out. And to be honest, I didn't understand it like completely in the beginning. And then I worked with Scrum, like without having done any training, anything like that. And then in 2010, I attended in January, February 2010, I attended a Scrum Master training with Jeff Sutherland here in Zurich. That was done through a company that we worked closely together with. Actually, they bought some of my of the shares of the company that I owned at that time. And so I learned Scrum I was taught by Jeff Sutherland, and the same year I started co-training with him in fall 2010. And since then, I've done 22 co-trainings with Jeff in Scrum Master trainings, and with a few other trainers. I don't think we've ever done one together, have we?
No, we haven't.
But yeah, with quite a few other Scrum trainers, I've done co-trainings, and the other way around also. I like to say, like, I co-piloted with Jeff, and then once he co-piloted me, but that was like real flying. So we were both pilots, Jeff and I. So I had him here in Switzerland, and I took him for a flight in a Cessna, and he was my co-pilot. But that was only once, and the rest of the times I was his co-pilot. Yeah. So yeah, then since 2010, so until 2010, I developed software. So I was a software engineer. Mostly it moved more and more towards like more Scrum Master roles and that kind of stuff. But since 2010, I basically stopped developing software. I usually say like that's the last time I was paid to write a line of code anyway, in 2010. And then since then, I've worked as an Agile Coach, as we call it today, Scrum Master, interim Scrum Master, interim product owner, chief product owner, those kind of roles. Yeah. Done quite a few, or supported, I should say. It's not like I done it myself, right? But supported and steered, led quite a few transformations in all kinds of industries. I'm very industry agnostic, to be honest. It's mostly in the software development area, but it has also been in some other contexts. But the industry itself is like it's finance, it's insurance companies, pharma, telcos. I've worked for companies like Lego, so toy manufacturing, or fashion companies. And also even though you said you're not interested in where I did it, but I've worked in Denmark, obviously with Lego and Bestseller, a lot in Switzerland where I'm still based, but also the US, England, Great Britain, and Germany. I've, amongst other, worked for Jägermeister. Strongly recommend Jägermeister as an employer. It's very fun. The first evening, it's not that fun the next day.
That's a good one. So already there's a bunch of things that I want to deep dive on with you. Let's start with the first one. You talked about mental models. So yes. You were taught a certain mental model during university, rapid prototyping. And when you then joined that very first bank, they were working in a completely different way, which didn't fit with your mental model. And then at some point you learned about the Agile Manifesto, and then later on about Scrum from one of the co-creators of Scrum himself, Jeff Sutherland. Now, you talked about your experience when the mental model, or when the model of the bank did not fit your mental model. How was your reaction when you first encountered the Agile Manifesto and then later Scrum as a specific framework to put the Agile Manifesto into practice?
It's an interesting question. It's almost like you briefed me, because I remember now. I kid you not, I'm still getting goosebumps when I think about the Agile Manifesto. When I read it the first time, because I'd lived like for a couple of years in this, I don't know, limbo, whether that's the right word, right? Where the world didn't behave as my mental model said like it should. Like anything else didn't make sense. That's what they taught us in university. And then I came out and it's like, and then I read this Agile Manifesto and I was like, heck, this is like somebody finally put it in words what my issue was, right? The individuals and interactions over processes and tool like this. And still today we see all this this focus on process and tools. Like, look at almost any new project, and the first thing they discuss is like, how do we manage this project? Which tools should we use, processes and all that? And it's not about like, can we manage to have a stable team, like a cross-functional team that can go from concept to cash and all that? The documentation, I can tell you stories about like another bank, actually, another major bank in Switzerland, the one that hasn't gone bust yet. Maybe emphasis on yet, I don't know. But anyhow, that bank, I was once asked like to write a document and so-called IT specification. And the idea is that I, from the business, get a requirements document. Then I write a so-called IT specification, like describe how we're going to build this IT system.
Yeah, from a technology perspective.
Exactly. From an IT perspective, with screenshots and all kinds of like writing prosa text on like, well, if this happens and so, and then if this exception happens, then we'll handle it like this and that, but no code. Right, really, like some HTML for the screenshots, but that's basically it, like if it's a web application. And then we hand it back to business and ask them, is this what you want? And then the idea is that they maybe give us some feedback on that. And then finally we sign that in blood probably. And then we develop the system exactly as described in the IT specification. And I like the idea of this feedback loop, like instead of just throwing over, so it's at least one feedback loop, right? But I remember I was writing this IT spec. And then at one point, like after a couple of days, this was like during my first week there, I asked them like, who's going to read this? In my mind going like, well, if my brother, who also studied computer science, reads this, it's a different document I'm going to write than if my mother, for instance, reads this, who has been a school teacher and is 40 or 30 years older, right? And they were like, what do you mean? It's like, well, who's going to read it? Well, we don't know, but our process says we should write this document, right? So write it. And I was like, every day they were coming, like, how far are you? And I went, well, I've done 30%, I've done 40%. You know, the waterfall, or the watermelon reporting, exactly. And I continued. And then after a week, I was about halfway done. And I thought, like, this is stupid. So I just said, like, I'm done. And till this day, nobody has come to ask, like, why was this document only half done? You said you were done. But I've done that bank a favor, right? I saved at least a week of work that was useless because nobody was reading this document anyway. Like, nobody ever complained. So it's
So you basically ran a really interesting test.
Yes. I've done similar tests, like but maybe that's irrelevant. But yeah, but yeah, basically, so back to the Agile Manifesto, like documentation over working software, right? The focus was it was strenuous. Can you say that strenuous? Like stressful to me to see all this stuff that we do that I felt didn't provide any value. And then when the Agile Manifesto came in 2001, it was like, yes, this is exactly it. As I said, I get goosebumps. At the beginning, a lot more. Now it's not so much anymore. I usually tell that to people. I say, like, go and if you haven't read the Agile Manifesto yet, I mean, it's just 4 value statements. Go in and read it again and again. Like, make it a recurrent task every month. Read it once. Then if you've done that for a year, maybe only every half year. But go and read it and the principles.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the 12 principles behind it is, from my perspective, to some extent, even more interesting because those 4 values, I rarely see people arguing against it. Now, with the principles, you can have really interesting conversations. So what does sustainable pace, for example, mean?
Yes.
Right? Or reducing the amount of work not done.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. So what does that actually mean? Then how do we put this into practice? But both the 4 values and the 12 principles behind it are really good topics to run retrospectives around.
Yeah. Yes.
How are we doing, right? On a scale from 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, whatever, right? How are we doing with regards to that? and give us concrete examples, right? And then and what could we change to just become a bit better in terms of sustainable pace or like individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So, I mean, for me, the first time I read it, I was like, does that even need to be written? Like, who, who would who would argue with that? And I mean, contrary to you, I don't have a background in software engineering, right? In computer science. I come from the medical world. So when I saw this, I was like, who in the world would work differently? And my dad said every company that he had worked with, basically all major telcos in Germany, he's like, they all work different to this. If you take the right-hand side of the Agile Manifesto, if you flip it, you're basically describing how all those big companies work. I was like, okay, there's a lot of opportunity in now changing how those organizations work, because I don't see, as an outsider, how they could add any value to customers in the same way that the highly innovative organizations do in for example, Silicon Valley, but also right now in many other places. Now, you talked about what kind of an impression the Agile Manifesto left on you. What was it about Scrum? And I mean, we both know, like Jeff is very, very clear about what Scrum is, right? How it works. I don't know how good he did that in 2010, but I also had a bunch of co-trainings with him, and I found him like incredibly clear on those things. What resonated with you back then that made you then also pursue this amount of co-trainings with him, becoming a Scrum practitioner yourself, ultimately a very successful Scrum trainer yourself? What was it?
To be honest, it's not so clear to me anymore. It's not like with the Agile Manifesto where I read it and I got the goosebumps. It's not like I had that. I don't remember anyway whether it was the same with Scrum. What I seem to remember is like the first time I read about Scrum, and it's actually not, like I said, I think it's my brother who said I was having, maybe it was actually before the Agile Manifesto, maybe it was in 97 or something like that, because I had some issues and I believe it was the first bank, the one that went bankrupt recently. When I worked there, my first job in Switzerland, where I spoke to my brother and I told him about like these issues, and he said like, why don't you check out Scrum? And I don't know, somehow I checked it out. I don't think Wikipedia existed back then already, and if it did, that's probably where I read about it the first time, or like some online somewhere I found it. And to be honest, as far as I remember, I don't even really understood like what is a Scrum Master and a product owner. And it's taken me surprisingly long, even though it is simple. It's like, it's not simple. It is simple, Scrum, but it's not easy to do. I don't think it's easy to understand. Again, if you have a mental model that you need like a lot of people delivering parts to your solution, and then you have a project manager who is coordinating, like everybody does it in the right order, and then like this guy, when he's finished, he delivers his parts to this girl over here, and when she's done, she gives it back to him, and he gives it, and then somebody is orchestrating all this like a project. If that is in your head, let's call that a mental model even. If that's your mental model, it's really hard to understand that a Scrum Master is doing something different, for instance. And I think it was hard for me to grasp in the beginning. However, in 2010, when I did the call with Jeff, I mean, I had worked with Scrum already back then. I just hadn't done the training. And that was just like, yeah, this is so clear. To me, Agile is like, if you use terminology of object-oriented programming, it's like the class, and Scrum is an implementation of it. So it's like, okay, now it makes it even easier, right? Now you can tell people, well, we need a Scrum Master, we need a product owner, we need a product backlog, we work in weekly or bi-weekly, or nowadays like just less than a month increments, and we need to have done work at the end and all that. It makes it even more clear. So that's kind of how I remember Scrum. And I think like there's a lot of criticism about Scrum. still, I think a lot of people do it wrongly.
Absolutely.
Mostly, again, because I think a lot of people just haven't been trained properly, and they don't understand what a Scrum Master is. And what we do, we have all these mental models, and what you see, you try to make sense of that with your mental model. So if I can't place the role of a Scrum Master anywhere, it's like probably something like a project manager, right? He seems to be the boss of this team, so it's probably the project, or maybe team lead. One of those two must be. And then you try to fit everything you hear about the Scrum Master into the team lead. So I think part of the training needs to really like shake people out of this and like, it's not a team lead. It's not a classical team lead anyway. It's not a project manager. It's somebody who is helping the team to have a vision of how do you want to work together in the future, and then clearing the path of getting there.
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned it at a point, like it seems like I had briefed you, and I can promise I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But you're taking the conversation exactly into the direction where I wanted to go, because I really liked how you brought up the topic of mental models, and how you laid out that based on the mental model you had from your time at university, the way work was done at the bank did not fit. There was incompatibility, right? Now, when we work with our customers, like you with your clients and I with my clients, etc., I believe we might, maybe you don't do that, but now talking to you, it clarifies things for me. I believe I might not put enough thought into the fact that their mental model might be, their existing mental model might be a bigger barrier to grasping the simple concept of Scrum, right? To for example, how I was socialized. Because for me, now coming from the medical world, fast iterations, fast feedback loops, of course, right? You don't want to like give a patient that you want to put into the anesthesia, like give them something and then learn an hour later that their blood pressure dropped and they're dead, right? You want that immediate feedback. That's what you design your monitoring systems and devices to work like. So for me, grasping that concept of frequent and fast feedback loops was very easy because it matched my existing mental model, the way I was socialized. Now, most of our clients, probably, they have different mental models, and we forget about that. So having that in mind, when you work now with customers, and you mentioned one of the reasons could be they are not properly trained or enabled, what is part of your strategy to help them move from one mental model to a new mental model a bit faster, so that they avoid a lot of the mistakes that they would probably make if it takes, or like just save time, save energy, save money, right? In terms of like progressing towards better products.
That's a good question. I don't have a framework or my own framework, anything like that, or a clear road or roadmap that I go through. I usually suggest them to start with some training, and I usually tell them like everybody needs to do like the agile part of the training, understanding what agility actually means, and I can talk a little bit more about what that actually means to me. One of the things that I really like to focus on is simplifying things as much as possible, not trying not to oversimplify them, but simplify things. And I think even the Agile Manifesto, as you said, like it's 4 value statements and 12 principles, even that is like for many people, it's hard. And that's why I'm saying like read it again every month. It's like if you only read it once, you'll only get like fractions of it. If and some of you'll misunderstand, and then you work that way. So that's, yeah, it's about training first. And it's not only the people like in the Scrum team that need to do this training, but certain parts of the training, everybody needs to do. And then more of that, everybody needs to do that's working with the Scrum team. And then the Scrum team itself is like, and I'm also telling like Scrum Masters, you guys need to do a product owner training because you are supposed to coach the product owner as well. How can you do that if you don't understand the role, right? So that's like, and it's not only about the training. It's also about like having a common terminology, or that's a big part of it actually. So they talk about the same thing. So they have the same hope. Well, it will never be the exact same, but they have a very similar understanding of what is a Scrum Master, what is a product owner, what happens in retrospective, what's the daily for, etc. Right? If you use just Scrum terminology. So that's usually what I start off with, and then what we sometimes do, or what I sometimes do, is I'm not a big fan of these classical assessments where you go and interview a lot of people, but I do parts of that to figure out. But I let them make the self-assessment. Sometimes during the training, I say like, so this is what agility in Scrum looks like. How do you do that today, right? To figure out like what problems do they actually want to solve, or do they need to solve? Because what often happens, or when I say often, it's a lot more than just often. It's probably in most cases is people say like, oh, we want to do Scrum. And if you ask them like why, they can't answer. Well, everybody else does it. We want to be agile because everybody else is agile. Yeah. And then I typically ask, so what's your biggest challenge? What's your big problem? And this can be on a project or department level. It can also be on an organizational level. And then often I see anyway, but it's a little bit like Matrix, like the Matrix, like Neo in the Matrix is like, to me, like whatever problem you give me, in almost all cases, I see that agility / Scrum will probably help you solve that problem, because it usually stems from some of the classical patterns that people, if it's software development, but in general product development. Yeah, I think usually, a lot of the issues that people have today or companies have today stem from that. Take the German auto industry, right? I mean, we see it everybody sees it. They can't react. They've had 12 years now to react, or 14 years now to react to the Model S from Tesla. And a friend of mine who has an ID3, Volkswagen ID3, has had it for, I think, 3 years now, like since it came out. And I called him actually and said like, how is it like, can Volkswagen do software updates now over the air? And he's like, no, I still have to go to the garage and get it done. It's crazy.
It can't be that difficult. It can't be that difficult. It can't be that difficult.
It can't. And they're still struggling with that. And again, I see agility. Like if they had like worked incrementally, they wouldn't have had those. I think. Well, you've actually worked with Volkswagen, right? So if I remember correctly, the software wasn't ready when the first cars rolled off the conveyor belt.
Yeah.
And I think they rented parking lots around in Wolfsburg or near Wolfsburg for 20,000 cars that weren't ready. And then what I never found out is like how, since they don't have over-the-air updates,
the USB drive.
So I guess they hired students or really cheap labor to go around with USB drives into every car. And it is, like I said, I worked in 1996 for this bank. That's when I started working for the bank. And I see so many places that still are delivering software this way, still building software this way, as if it's a project and not a product. I forgot the question. What was your question?
The question was, how do we help people move from one mental model to the next? And to some extent, you also gave an answer to that. Now, I believe, looking at this, right, I think we need to draw connections to their existing mental model. So you earlier gave the example of, the Scrum Master, what do they do? Oh, it's similar to a project manager. And at the same time, we really need to challenge, no, it's not, right? There are several elements of a project manager that move into a Scrum Master. So I'm sure you know that one exercise in Scrum Master trainings, right, the project manager exercise, where you write down all the responsibilities and then you map them into the 3 roles. And some of those responsibilities completely fall away. They go into the trash bin, right? So I think those kinds of exercises help build the bridge to the existing mental model, but at the same time, demonstrate to people that the change is not going to be renaming, relabeling all the project managers to being Scrum Masters, right? Yes. And one of the things that I say to people is, no matter which role people take on a Scrum team, and maybe with the exception of the developers, but even there, everybody needs to learn new things. There is no existing role in any organization that I have visited that is 100% compatible with the role that those people will take on a Scrum team. So everybody needs to go on that growth journey. And I think like creating that awareness for them is really interesting. Now, talking about growth, what I wanted to explore, and I love the fact you've been a computer scientist since 1991, right?
96.
And you wrote 1996. Okay. You wrote code, you mentioned, till 2010. That's the last time you were paid for it. Maybe you've been coding ever since in your free time. Now, what benefits and downsides do you see in the role of a Scrum Master if someone has that technical background?
So for the organization, what benefits there
for the person, for the team, for the org?
So, I mean, I think Jeff actually in a training once, like somebody asked that or a very similar question is like, what's the point of a Scrum Master, or like what happens if we don't have a Scrum Master? Or is that like, could we save money by not having a Scrum Master? I mean, it's a full-time employee, right? That you can save away, or at least 50% employee. If for instance, Scrum Master would be Scrum Master for 2 teams, and that's arguable whether that's a good idea, and it depends on the context and all that. But Jeff's answer was, well, if you want your team to suck forever, don't hire a Scrum Master, right? And basically that's it. So the value of the Scrum Master is in how well the Scrum Master can help clear the path. To me, that is actually leadership. Leadership is like having this, having and sharing this beacon of where we're going to go. So for a product owner, that's the product. For Scrum Master, is like how do we want to work together as a team, say in a year or 2 years from now, or in the future anyway, right? And then helping the team getting there. That's leadership generally. I think those are the 2 roles of leadership. Again, if you simplify it, and I hope it's not oversimplified, but if you simplify it, it is like align people, make them run in the same direction, and then help them run as fast as possible. And you use that, right? It's not about like running super fast for a week and then being out of breath for 3 weeks. The Scrum Master is like on the process side is the first level of leadership, because that's exactly what a Scrum Master should be doing.
Yeah. Now, fully agree on that. Now, given you have a technical background, right? What are the benefits and downsides? Because, and the reason I bring this up,
yes,
there are people that fundamentally believe, talking about software engineering, if you haven't been an engineer yourself, you should never be a Scrum Master. There are people that fundamentally believe, if you happen to be an engineer, you should never be a Scrum Master because, right, you would be interfering with the team, etc. I think I've seen great Scrum Masters that have been engineers, and I've seen great Scrum Masters that have never been engineers. But I would love to see your perspective as an engineer on this question.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. And I hate it if they do the same with product owners. I've been for working for organizations where they said, product owner must come out of business because I need to understand business. But I've also seen like technical product, or like people having with an engineering background being excellent product owners. Okay, so just don't do that rule ever. Same for the Scrum Master. So what I've done, for instance, I've been Scrum Master and also software engineer on a team. You still see that quite often today, because organizations have often a hard time seeing the value in a Scrum Master. It's not really tangible as it is like for a software engineer or a tester or anything like that, which is, by the way, the same for any leader. Like what's the value of a leader, right? It's really hard to measure. So I've tried that also being a software developer. So this was pre-2010. being software developer and a Scrum Master. And I can this is for me. I'm not saying this is the same for every engineer, but what happened in my case is like you will have these sprints where you take in too much work, be it because you underestimated how much it is to do, be it because somebody went sick or whatever, right? But there will be these sprints where you've taken in too much work. What happened in our case is when that happened, I was like towards the end of the sprint, I was in the choice of like, do I do my Scrum Master job, like clear the path, remove impediments, all that, have discussions with the product owner and stakeholders, etc., or do I code? And if you see like your line on the burn-down chart above the predicted line, it's like there was a certain pressure on like self-implied pressure by me. It's like, I better code some so we get it done. That then led to us having an artificial high velocity, which then led to us to taking in too much work in the next sprint, which then again led me to doing more software development instead of my real job, I'd say, like, or the more valuable job in that context anyway, as a Scrum Master, which ultimately led to me like doing 80% of the time doing software development, and 20% of the time I was doing Scrum Master work, but only the boring stuff, like organizing meeting, inviting people, like getting a room with a beamer. Back then you had to like separately find rooms with beamers, and that kind of stuff. Which again, often you see that exactly. That's what a Scrum Master is just a facilitator. It's just like running through a retrospective, maybe investing an hour to prepare the retrospective and that kind of stuff. And then I totally understand why people say like, what's the value of a Scrum Master? I mean, and then they do turns within the team and like everybody can be Scrum Master because all you need to do is invite people for a meeting. So that's the danger. If you're not a software engineer, of course you can all of a sudden, you could still like fall into the trap of like helping with testing and that kind of stuff, or doing administrative work. I was recently working for an organization here in Zurich, where they hired me, or I was internal, and they wanted me to be Scrum Master. And it turned out what they interpreted Scrum Master to be is somebody who takes all the boring administrative stuff and takes it away from the developers. And the developers kind of were like, okay, that's great. I want Scrum Master now, right? Because he's taking all the administrative stuff away from us, so we don't have to do that. And I said, like, but that's not really valuable. I mean, then I understand why a Scrum Master makes like half as much as a software engineer. What a Scrum Master really should do is, like I said, is like clear the path, remove impediments, and let's just say like that team gets 2% quicker every sprint. That's 2% for eternity, and that is interest, right? So it's another 2%, exactly compounding. I don't remember, but 2% every week, if they do weekly sprints, is 1.02 to the power of 52. If you work every week during the year, even around Christmas, and that's probably, I don't know, that's probably 700% over the year or something like that. It's a crazy high number.
So I have the number. If you improve 1% every day, it's 37x.
Yes, exactly. But that's every day then. So I was,
but that's 1%.
Yes,
but yeah, I mean, it's incredible. And even if you improve 10% over the year, right? If it's a group of 10 people, right? And then you have one Scrum Master helping them become 10% better, just by doing that and assuming that everybody makes the same salary in average, Scrum Master's salary is already paid, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it's super easy. I think it's super easy to improve a team's performance by 10% in a year.
10% over a year. So that should be easy. However, I think organizations generally are not ready for that, because the Scrum Master's job, like some of the improvements will be internally and will be possible just by the team changing things that they actually can change themselves. It could be about like not being as specific on stories as they used to be, like getting everything like in line before they start working on one, and they experiment with like, you know what, let's start a little bit earlier with more uncertainty, but also more freedom on solving the issue. and then figuring out, hey, actually that works much better, and we get done earlier, etc., right? But a lot of the impediments that you will meet as a Scrum Master are organizational impediments. And organizations are just not ready, or surprisingly, well,
not willing.
Exactly. Well, I don't think it's willing in the sense of that they say like, we see that would be an improvement, what we don't want it. So I think it's more grasping, understanding that, hey, if we remove this step, this process, or if we remove this, like this team, like before they can go into production, it has to be verified by another team that they actually can do it within their team, or that they are in the control of, if we continue with software development, of their own CI/CD pipeline, and they can like to do deployments to production themselves, and it hasn't to go through it. They just can't grasp that this process step, or all these process steps that make them slow, right? They were invented at some point in time for a good reason, but they don't make sense anymore today because it's a different team. There's different tools. There's different ways of ensuring quality, and they still have this and it's culture, and strategy eats what is it? The
culture eats strategy
for breakfast. It's the other way around, exactly. And you can have a strategy of becoming more agile and fast moving. And I don't know, maybe Volkswagen had an honest strategy of wanting to become more agile, but the culture is so hard to change. And that comes back to your original question of how to change these mental models. A little swipe back to that, or loop back to that. I think with training and discussion, you can only do so much. I think people have to experience this. And I still like the idea, even though it's been hammered by many people. Like I think Jeff called it once, or somebody called it shock therapy Scrum, and maybe that's too much.
Shock therapy comes from Jeff.
Yes. And it's like popular, maybe in particular in Europe, it's maybe not so popular. Maybe we need to find a different term. But the idea of just doing as the Scrum Guide says, like whether it's for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 months or whatever, and then making decisions. What I see many organizations like to do is like optimize Scrum from day one. We get Scrum. But you know what we're going to do? Let's just take a stupid example, 6-week sprints, right? Because it fits better for us. No, it doesn't fit better for you. It's just what you did before, and you're doing the same thing. That said, I mean, if you before that had like half-year releases, 6 weeks is a big step forward, okay? So don't get me wrong. But, yeah. Try and do, whether it's Scrum or Kanban or any, like your own process. You just want to change something so you can deliver quicker. Stick to that. Don't find excuses why moving away from that for a while. And I think that is necessary to change those mental models. And that experience, like, I'd never thought it'd be this smooth to actually do a release. Because if you only do a release every 6 months, it's going to hurt. And then what is our reflex? It's like, let's not do that often. Let's do it only every year from now on, because it's really
painful, really costly.
And that's the advantage of being an engineer, right? I mean, probably before I learned about Scrum, I learned this saying, like, if something hurts, do it more often.
Yes.
So that's something we learned in software engineering a long time ago, right? And it is similar to this. And then like when you tell people, you know what, I want you to go from 6-month releases to, let's just say, 4-week releases. Every 4 weeks, they go like, that's not possible. That's crazy. We have to do all this. Like we have to update all the documentation. We have to update the architecture document. We have to like test all this. There's no way. Like we usually spend 3 weeks on that. What do you want us to develop for a week and then test for 3 weeks and then do that every month? That's crazy. But when they start doing it, they see all these effects of like, hey, we actually don't need to test for 3 weeks. Actually, 1 week of testing is enough, or we can even integrate it, or we automate the testing or parts of it and do unit tests and all kinds of stuff. And you start working on a CI/CD pipeline, so the whole process happens automatically, etc. They start like after you've done that 3 times, they go like, this is actually much better. But you could have tried to explain this to them forever, and they would have continued saying like, this doesn't work. This is never possible here. This works in small companies, but not here, and all these excuses, right? So yeah, this is just a little back to the mental models.
I think it's really important, right? A lot of people don't believe something until they have seen it, right? So demonstrating it to them is really impactful, and especially demonstrating it to them in their context. Because we can speak about Spotify as long as we want, right? A bank would say they're completely unregulated. We have regulators, right?
Yeah.
A pharma company would say, in our case, people could die. At Spotify, if they get something wrong, nobody's going to die, right? Automotive company could say the same thing, and they could say, actually, in our case, it's hardware and software combined. Spotify is not, right? So they always find excuses.
Yeah,
and
even if you take the car, and sorry for interrupting you, but even if you the car industry and you tell them, but Tesla does it, that's also car industry. They go, but they are Americans. They have different hiring laws, right? If you hire people in Germany, we can't fire them. It's like really hard. So that they always find an excuse why it doesn't work for them.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And the one place where you take away all of the excuses is if you have an internal success story. And I think that's so impactful, where they see, oh, okay, it also works in our case, right? Now, we had to do this adjustment and that adjustment and that adjustment and that adjustment. Now, going back to what you mentioned earlier, right? Adjusting or adapting a framework like Scrum so that it fits your purposes, but somehow communicating that you've optimized it. I always ask people, what are you optimizing for? Mm-hmm. Are you optimizing for it's like less painful for us
right now?
Or are you actually optimizing for being more agile? Now, we go back, you mentioned earlier, right? Your definition of agility. My definition of agility is systematically and frequently reducing uncertainty. So if I'm thinking about, I want to make an adjustment to Scrum, I always ask myself, is it going to help me to be more systematic and faster with regards to reducing uncertainty? If yes, let's do that adjustment. If no, let's not do it. Taking your example, if I move from 4-week sprints to 6-week sprints, is it going to make me faster by reducing uncertainty? No, it's going to make me slower. So that's probably an adjustment I'm just making out of laziness and not based on the belief or even conviction that it will make me more agile, right? And I think helping organizations understand that, right? Where are we taking shortcuts and where are we actually improving whatever framework we're using, be it Scrum, Kanban, XP, whatever, right? And all of them have, fortunately, a continuous improvement process in place. So they want to be improved, but with regards to the actual intention of being more agile and not, it's then easier for us because we're not being paid for having it easy, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think my definition of agility, like what I sometimes call core agility, is did that ding 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 make it into the sound here as well? Okay.
Oh, maybe. It doesn't matter.
My definition of core agility, as I like to say, and I have to think more about yours, about yours first. Generally, I struggle a little bit with the aim being to reduce uncertainty. I generally like more to say, like, we have to learn to live with uncertainty and even see it as a chance. So if all your competitors can't live with that uncertainty, but you can, and you can manage that uncertainty, that's an advantage for you. And the better you can deal with uncertainty and live with it and live with that you don't know exactly what's going to happen 4 weeks from now, the better you are equipped in this more and more complex becoming world. My definition of agility is actually is like the art of doing the smallest possible productive steps, and planning for that with a vision of like where you finally want to go. So you do a step in the right direction, and then after each of those steps, look up, take in your new perspective, all the new information that has come towards you in that while that time it took to make that step, and then plan for your next step. still in the direction of where you want to go, which might have moved by then. I have a little bit more crisp written version of this than this, but and that brings me to if these organizations that want to become agile, that often don't know why, but everybody else does it, so we need to do it as well. They all struggle. I think I can say this safely. They all struggle with the increasing complexity of this world. That things change faster, be it like this intertwinedness in the world that leads to a ship being stuck in the Suez Canal, and all of a sudden hell breaks loose in Europe because you can't get delivered anything anymore, and the ships can't just go south around, or a chip factory in Japan burns down, and all of a sudden this, or prices go through the roof, and that increased complexity is everybody is struggling with because they're not fit for that. If they manage to do smaller productive steps, taking in the perspective and living with that, the goal actually might move a little bit after they've done that step. If they learn that, then they are agile. And I don't care whether it's Scrum or Kanban or XP or like, you know what, even SAFe. I'm not a fan of SAFe at all. I think it's caused more harm than good. If that actually helps them do smaller steps, then you're agile as an organization, and you can react. And all of a sudden, like you can react. The chips can't be delivered anymore because that factory burned down where you usually got the chips from. Well, figure out where to get them from instead. And since you only do small steps, you can do that quite frequently. And that's basically agile. So
I think with that said, with that example at the very end, we're at the end of our time box, Klaus.
Okay.
I think we could talk for hours.
Bro.
Yeah. And super excited to have you as one of our Agile Academy ambassadors. And also thanks for this conversation. I learned a lot about your background, and I think this will also be interesting for organizations out there, for people that want to embark on this journey, that they know there's someone they can count on, especially given your vast experience in that space. So thanks for taking the time and speaking to me today.
Thanks, Sohrab. Maybe one final thing, because I thought of that before, but so what I think I can bring to organizations is like this, I think, deep understanding of like this complexity and what agile actually is, but also I think I'm fairly good at motivating people to try this out. As we said before, like the mental model, to change that, you can bring as many examples from outside. If they don't want it, right, inherently they feel like, oh, this is going to hurt, and we want to optimize for not hurting, not changing, because changing requires energy. They have to try it themselves and be willing to do this experiment, whether it's be on a small level or on a bigger level with several teams or a whole organization. I think generally I've done a pretty good job in the past of like convincing people, and this is partly convincing, or like taking them on this journey and saying like, let's do this experiment. And also phrasing the experiment as small as possible, so it is a reversible thing and not something that ruins everything and they have to do it forever. But yeah, basically that's it. I think I'm fairly good at that. So, yep.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.